Most people have experienced deja vu at least once. You step into a place that you'd never visited, hear a sentence that you've never heard, or find yourself inside a moment that should be new, and yet something in you recognizes it instantly. Not intellectually, not as a memory that you can retrieve. It's subtler than that. A quiet certainty that does not ask for proof. And almost everyone dismisses it. We're taught to dismiss it. We're told it's a neurological delay, a misfire in the brain's timing system, a memory retrieved a fraction of a second too late. Now, these explanations sound tidy and reasonable. They allow us to move on without questioning anything fundamental. Yet none of them actually describe what deja vu feels like. Deja vu does not feel broken. It does not feel confused. It does not feel random. It feels precise, self-contained, coherent. It feels as though something briefly aligned. That distinction matters because when an experience consistently carries coherence, treating it as a malfunction protects a deeper assumption. That assumption is that time moves in one direction, that identity is singular, and that experience unfolds forward only. Within that framework, deja vu cannot be meaningful, it must be neutralized. But what if the framework itself is incomplete? What if deja vu is not a glitch in memory, but a different category of memory altogether? Not memory of events, but memory of state. Not something that happened in the past, but something already lived in orientation. A familiarity that does not belong to time as we usually understand it. When consciousness is treated as primary rather than incidental, experiences like deja vu stop being inconvenient anomalies. They begin to function as information, not information about what will happen and not information about what already happened, but information about access. This is where the idea of parallel selves becomes relevant. In quantum theory, particularly the many worlds interpretation, every decision branches reality. Each possible outcome continues. Nothing collapses. Now, from that perspective, there is not one future self waiting to be built. There is a spectrum of selves already lived, differentiated by choice, belief, and internal configuration. You do not have to take that literally to feel its relevance. You only need to notice something simpler. Sometimes insight arrives fully formed. Sometimes clarity appears without reasoning. Sometimes you know without working it out. That knowing does not feel predictive, it feels familiar. And that single observation destabilizes almost everything we assume about intuition, growth, and identity. Because if intuition feels like recognition rather than anticipation, then perhaps it's not reaching forward at all. Perhaps it's remembering.
When intuition is discussed culturally, it's often framed as unreliable or emotional. Something soft, something subjective, something that should not be trusted when serious decisions are involved. But that framing rarely matches lived experience. Real intuition does not feel chaotic or vague. It feels very clean, and deja vu carries this same quality. It does not argue, it does not persuade, it does not explain itself. It simply registers as true, even when the mind cannot place it. That's why it unsettles people. For a brief moment, it bypasses the systems we rely on to orientate ourselves. Excuse me. Time, memory, narrative, something outside the expected order touches the present, and the mind doesn't know where to file it. If we consider the possibility that parallel selves are not destinations but states, the experience becomes less mysterious. A state is an internal configuration, a way consciousness organizes perception, expectation, emotion, and identity simultaneously. Confidence is a state, doubt is a state, clarity is a state. These are not traits you own, they're orientations you occupy. Parallel selves differ less by circumstance and more by state. One version hesitated, another moved cleanly, one stayed fragmented, another stabilized. These versions are not distant doubles living elsewhere, they are coherent orientations available through resonance. Déjà vu may be the moment when two such orientations briefly overlap. This explains why déjà vu rarely brings images or instructions. It doesn't communicate through detail, it communicates through recognition, a quiet sense that something has already been navigated, even if the details remain unknown. And notice where déjà vu most often appears, not during dramatic turning points, but during neutral moments, walking, listening, entering a space. This tells us something essential. Access does not come through intensity, it comes through openness. When the self relaxes its grip, recognition just slips through. That alone changes the idea that insight must be earned slowly through effort. Because if recognition can occur now without striving, then insight may not be built at all. It may be accessed.
And this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because it confronts a story that most people live inside without ever questioning. The story that you are becoming someone over time, that you are unfinished, that clarity, confidence, or capability sits somewhere ahead of you, waiting to be earned. Becoming assumes absence. It assumes you are not yet what you will be one day. But recognition does not operate on lack. You do not recognize what you have never touched. From this perspective, growth is not accumulation, it is selection. You do not build identity piece by piece. You move between identities that already exist as coherent states. Some feel strained, some feel unfamiliar, some feel natural. And the ones that feel natural are not always the ones that you are currently inhabiting. That is the friction point. There's another layer here that people miss. Recognition is not an opinion, it's a physiological event. When a state is coherent, the body behaves as though it has already settled the question. Breathing deepens, microtension releases, attention stops hunting. That bodily shift is not decoration, it's evidence that the system has moved from speculation into alignment. And that's why more information often fails to resolve real decisions. Information stacks in the mind, but the decision is being made at the level of a state. A fragmented state can hold perfect facts and still feel uncertain, because uncertainty is not always a lack of knowledge, it's often a lack of coherence. One useful move is to replace analytical questions with resonant ones. Instead of asking which option is safest, ask which option feels already lived. Instead of what will happen if I choose this, ask where is there quiet familiarity. The point is not to get a cinematic preview of outcomes. The point is to feel which orientation is stable. When that stability appears, it tends to be simple, even plain, and that is precisely what makes it reliable. Once clarity is accessible, confusion stops being neutral. Sometimes confusion simply means misalignment, not ignorance, not failure, just an orientation that is not settled. This does not mean every question has an answer waiting. Some experiences are genuinely new. Some paths are being formed for the first time. But many decisions feel heavy, not because they're complex, but because they're being approached from a state that has not resolved them. When resonance occurs, decision making changes. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" the question quietly becomes, "Which version of me has already lived this cleanly?" The answer does not arrive as excitement. That is important. It arrives as steadiness, as obviousness, as something so simple it can almost feel anticlimactic. This is why forcing intuition collapses it. Effort assumes distance. Resonance requires similarity. You do not reach for coherence, you allow it. Déjà vu teaches this passively. The body registers it before the mind interferes. Breath shifts, attention widens, the moment stabilizes. That's not mystical language, that is signal.
Once this framework is in place, uncertainty takes on a different meaning. Uncertainty no longer automatically means I do not know. Sometimes it means I am not aligned yet. And sometimes it means this is genuinely new territory. Those are very different experiences, but most people respond to all uncertainty the same way, by thinking harder. Resonance does not respond to pressure. It responds to availability. A key detail is that availability is not passivity. The observant state is alert, but it is not grasping. It notices what is present without trying to turn the moment into a verdict. That matters because urgency distorts perception. Urgency makes every signal sound like an alarm. In a calmer state, the same signal is readable. The recalled state, by contrast, has a particular texture. It's clean and it's non-performative. It doesn't feel like optimism, it feels like an arrival. It can even feel oddly emotionless, not because it lacks any care, but because it lacks debate. When people override that state, they usually do it for social reasons. Fear of being wrong, fear of looking irrational, fear of choosing without justification. So the destabilizing invitation here is practical, even if we're not turning it into a guided exercise. When déjà vu happens, or when a quiet "I know" appears, treat it as a diagnostic. Do not ask, "Is this true?" first. Ask, "What state am I in right now?" And what state is this moment pointing towards? That shift moves intuition from superstition into literacy. There is a state worth naming here, not as a technique, but as a reference point. It can be called the observant state. Relaxed attention without evaluation. It's not passive and it's not analytical, it's simply being present. And when urgency drops, attention widens naturally. And when attention widens, the system becomes receptive. From there, another state often becomes accessible, something sometimes called the recalled state. The recalled state carries calm certainty without explanation. It does not rush, it does not justify itself, and it doesn't argue. It simply knows. This is where the destabilization deepens. The recalled state feels very different from hope. Hope leans forward, recall settles inward. Hope anticipates, recall recognizes. When someone says, I just knew, this is often what they're describing. This doesn't remove responsibility, it actually increases it. Because once coherence is felt, misalignment becomes obvious. Choices that move away from it feel noisy, tight, fragmented. That discomfort isn't a punishment, but it is a feedback. And feedback only becomes painful when it's ignored.
As alignment stabilizes, something else begins to shift. And people often struggle to describe it accurately. They call it synchronicity. They talk about better timing, smoother movement, chance encounters that arrive at exactly the right moment. But nothing external has suddenly rearranged itself. What has changed is resistance. When an internal contradiction dissolves, experience stops being distorted. Life doesn't become magical, it becomes responsive. Actions land more cleanly. Decisions feel less dramatic. Momentum increases without force. This is where the idea of parallel selves becomes practical rather than philosophical. You do not visualize them. You do not consult them. You do not imagine conversations or outcomes. You align with their orientation. Deja vu becomes useful here not as proof, but as calibration. It teaches the nervous system what recognition feels like. It establishes a baseline. And once that baseline is felt, it can be trusted when it appears again. Not as a command, not as an instruction, as guidance. From this perspective, the future is not empty. It is not unknown territory waiting to be conquered. It is populated by states already lived, already stabilized, already coherent. Accessing these states does not require belief systems, rituals, or effort. It requires permission. Permission to stop insisting on becoming, permission to stop treating identity as something missing, permission to remember. This is destabilizing because it removes a familiar excuse. If clarity is available, then delay becomes visible, not as failure, but as misalignment. And that visibility changes how responsibility is experienced. Responsibility no longer feels heavy, it feels precise. When alignment is tasted, it becomes easier to recognize when it is absent. Choices that move away from coherence register immediately as friction, tightness, noise, discomfort. This is feedback. Feedback allows refinement, and refinement is what creates that sense that life is moving with you rather than against you. Not because you're in control, but because you are no longer resisting yourself. Deja vu quietly points to this possibility. It reveals that familiarity can exist without history, that certainty can arise without explanation, that orientation can precede understanding. It shows that the system already knows what coherence feels like. And once that is known, it can no longer be unknown.
This brings us to the quiet conclusion of the conversation. Deja vu is not here to be explained away. It's not here to prove anything. It's here to orientate you, to remind you that consciousness is not confined to a single narrative, a single trajectory, or a single version of self. You are not one self moving blindly forward through time. You are a field of potential, selectively remembered. And when intuition arises, it may not be guessing, it may be recalling. When clarity appears without effort, it may not be new. It may feel familiar because it has already been lived somewhere within the spectrum of your own coherence. This is why this conversation can feel disorientating. It quietly removes the comfort of linear progress and replaces it with responsibility for alignment. Not dramatic responsibility, but subtle responsibility. The responsibility to notice what feels familiar, the responsibility to trust steadiness over excitement, the responsibility to allow recognition without proof. And this guidance does not announce itself loudly, and it doesn't demand belief. It simplifies rather than overwhelms. And when honored, it reduces unnecessary struggle. When ignored, life grows noisier. But it isn't a punishment again, it's a signal. And deja vu is one such signal. Small, fleeting, easy to dismiss, yet it carries an invitation. Not to escape this life, but to inhabit it more precisely. not to chase futures, but to remember forward, not to wait to become someone, but to recognize who is already available. The destabilization is gentle but complete. Identity is no longer a project, it is a selection. Time is no longer a barrier, it is a coordinate. Intuition is no longer a guess, it is a memory. And when that lands, something settles. You stop searching for certainty and begin recognizing it. You stop asking what comes next and begin feeling what aligns. You stop waiting for permission and realize it was never, ever required. And if that sounds too abstract, notice the simplest proof. The moments you trust most are the moments you stop negotiating with yourself. The mind may still chatter, but the center is stable. And that stability is what people call conviction, but it is really coherence. And coherence is contagious. Once you live from it, even briefly, it becomes harder to accept the old noise as normal. You start recognizing misalignment faster, and you stop romanticizing delay ever again. Deja vu does not give answers, it gives orientation.
If this conversation resonated, let it settle, rather than rushing past it. Insight doesn't always arrive to be analyzed. Sometimes it arrives to be recognized, and recognition tends to deepen when revisited. If you'd like to continue exploring these ideas with us, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who might appreciate this perspective, and ring the bell so that you don't miss further conversations. Until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.